Still Loading podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people like Pib Extra, Red from the Kaito and Red Show, Sang H, Mike from the Old Switcheroo podcast, Parallax Puddles, Melissa S, Matt aka Stormageddon, Doug from the Nostalgia Marcanon podcast, Ryan K, Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Stephen P, Gilmer, and Mr. Biscuits have all been wonderful enough to support the show over there. So if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, how do you spell Game Gear?
With 12 A's, but only for 3 hours.
Ah! Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today's episode, it is a console retrospective episode. It has been quite some time since we've covered a console on this show, and for this episode, it is the 35th anniversary of its North American release. Can you believe it? Well, 35th and like a month, 35 years and like a month, whatever. It came out in April of 1991. We were talking about, of course, the Sega Game Gear. And joining me today from the Fun and Games podcast is Gen Moonen. Jen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Really excited to talk about the Sega Game Gear. I try to keep how much the Game Gear is fundamental to my gaming history quiet because, you know what? I don't know why. Let's get weird with it.
That was, you know what, a little behind the scenes listeners, that was another working tagline for the episode, getting weird with the Game Gear. Like
Game Geared.
Kind of a slanted rhyme a little bit.
That's okay. The Game Gear can manage it.
That it can. Yeah, we are here to talk about the Sega Game Gear. The much misunderstood, I would say, a misunderstood handheld system made by Sega that came out in April of 1991. In Japan, it came out on October 6th, 1990. So we're a little bit past the 35th anniversary for the Japanese release date.
Sorry to all the Japanese listeners here.
Yeah, right. All probably like 5 of them. Though,
I mean,
you know what?
Thank you for being here.
I do guest over at Tokyo Game Life, and Mono is a Japanese. He's based out of Japan, so who knows? Maybe I've gotten a few from there.
But also, Sega had the bigger console success in America, so
yes,
having a little bit of the North America centrism on this isn't uncalled for.
No, definitely not. The Game Gear was discontinued on April 30th, 1997 by Sega. However, it did get a rebranded, kind of like reissuing by Majesco Entertainment in 2002. It didn't last very long. It only was re-released for about a year or so. But what I did not know is that Majesco is still technically around, though they are owned by Liquid Media Group, and Liquid Media no longer lists them as one of their subsidiaries. So we don't know if the company is still up and around, but, you know, shout out to Majesco for revitalizing the Game Gear for a little bit. Oh my gosh, you know what, Jen? You're based out of New York. I'm based out of like Eastern PA. This company, Majesco, is based out of Hazlet, New Jersey.
Dang.
We should take a road trip and question them. Like, what are you doing with Game Gear?
Oh my God, we could stage a whole thing.
I'm trying to see
all the Game Gear fans. Let's go.
Their website is still up and running too. So I don't know. I have to see what have they been up to recently. Their last post on their website is from 2020. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That
we got to investigate. We got to find out.
Yeah, we've got to do some hard-hitting journalism over here. We'll have to check that out. Anyway, so yes, we are here to talk about the Game Gear, and we are going to dive into our personal histories with the system. And I will actually go first. Normally, I would give my guest the floor on this, but my personal history is that I actually don't really have one. It's more, my personal history is just not knowing it existed until I was an adult.
Mhm.
And once I got into retro gaming, in like 2008, 9, 10, somewhere around there, and then like in the early 2010s and stuff like that, that's when I started learning about, all these extra consoles that like didn't sell incredibly well, but like they had some type of footprint in North America, large or small. This one happened to be more medium sized, but I had no idea it existed. So once I learned about the Game Gear, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, Sega made a backlit system and it lost to the Game Boy? Like, how did that? And then I learned more about the context and everything with it, but still, it blew my mind that Sega made a handheld. Like, I had no idea. And and now it blew my mind even more to know that they made a second one technically with the Nomad, even though it was not meant to be a successor to the Game Gear. That's a whole nother story, though.
Yeah, well, that thing did not last long.
I mean, it was kind of destined to fail based off how Sega handled stuff. But that's neither here nor there. So
yeah, that's a kerfuffle of 1995 for Sega of America, and that is not for this retrospective.
That is like a full episode in and of itself. Like Sega 1995 is that there's just so much to talk about in that year for Sega, between 32X, between Saturn, between Nomad, and like there's that would be a really good episode, actually.
Oh,
like
yeah,
really fun topic.
The Sega 3 console pileup.
Yeah, the triple console pileup of that. Yeah, absolutely. Put this on, pin this. This is going to be a fucking, what is it? Put a pin in this. I think that's a great idea for an episode at some point. But yeah, that's all I have for my personal history with it. I was just pleasantly surprised once I got into retro gaming and game history to learn about it existing, because I thought it was cool that Sega made a handheld. I had only known them for their home console, so that was a very pleasant surprise for me. Jen, what about you, though? What's your personal history with the Game Gear?
My personal history with the Game Gear was what I grew up with. The first console in my house was an NES, but it was always in my older brother's room. And, that was the only sibling I had. It was just me and my older brother. And so I played plenty of Nintendo, but that was, again, by his leave, or if I could sneak in when he wasn't looking. So mostly by his leave. But on my 8th birthday in 1994, I was given a Sega Game Gear because my cousin had one. One of the other neighborhood kids had one. I don't remember how much I talked about this or anything, but clearly this was something that my parents picked up on because I didn't make a birthday list or anything. This was like, yeah, you wouldn't shut up about it, so we got you one. So, to my recollection. And my parents had the wonderful foresight and the fortune of getting me one in 1994 when the Sega Power Back came out, which was the big fuck-off battery pack that you could attach to the back that actually stayed attached to the system, that gave it actually about 8 hours or so of battery life. So, yeah, all the memes about how bad the battery life was with 6 AA batteries and everything, I did not know that until I was an adult. Because,
wow, okay.
Well, in kind of the same way that you looked back and went like, oh my gosh, wow, what is this whole system? I realized that I had this, big thing that made the battery life cool or made it rechargeable. For me, it was the thing of like, oh, this is so my folks don't have to buy batteries. I didn't realize how good I had it in that way. And so I grew up in New Jersey, and the extended family that we visited the most was in Vermont, which is somewhere around a 4 to 5 hour drive, depending on traffic and everything else and how many rest stops, so a little longer. That Game Gear would, on a full charge, last me the whole ride. And the backlit screen was super useful and fun because once you got up towards Vermont and it would get dark, there's no streetlights there. You're driving between towns and stuff, like you just got headlights on cars. So I didn't need any additional light. I was able to play as much Sonic, Mortal Kombat, Shinobi, any of these as I wanted to while doing all of that. And then, got a car adapter, got all of those things. So this was like my travel setup. I had a Game Gear like bag that was basically like a camera bag or something that had, my console that was probably weighed less than what a Steam Deck does now, but was about the size. It was like holding 2 VHS tapes together. Slightly slightly more ergonomic, but like, if you're somebody that has the Titanic VHS release, just hold on to that. And that was my Game Gear experience, but I loved it. And gear that up with all of my games. And yet again, I didn't get a Game Boy until Pokemon. So for me, Game Boy didn't have as much of a hold over me. Like, it was cool, I liked it, but I loved my Game Gear, and I would pick up games for it. And I think it was discontinued in 1997, but support for the Game Gear dropped severely from between 1994 and 1995, which A, made it easier to pick up games on the cheap, but B, meant that I already had the feeling of having to fight for this scrappy little thing.
Yeah.
There would be things that came out, like a lot of Disney titles that came out that were for, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Game Boy, and Game Gear kind of thing. Game Gear was always the afterthought. And you see this even now with console, with re-releases of game collections, Disney Afternoon Collection, the Marvel Maximum Collection, the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection. There might be a Game Gear title in there, but there were several that were for the library and several that I had growing up that I'm not going to sit there and say this thing sucks because it doesn't have the Game Gear titles. I'm not going to say it, but I am thinking it just a little bit somewhere in my heart of hearts. Like, this was my little, purple's my favorite color. And I think some of that is because when I saw purple on the video game shelf, I knew there was a Game Gear game. Because that was what was on this. That stripe was already established as part of the box by the time I was buying Game Gear games. So, yeah, no, this was my thing. This was how I gamed when I was little. I did get a PS1, and that is probably my favorite, like, home console. Again, different conversation. But, like, the Game Gear mattered a lot to me. And I have so many fond memories of it. And I currently own 4 Game Gears. I have half a working Game Gear. I've yet to start, modifying them and fixing them up. But when the Analog Pocket came out, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I've always liked analog products, but I'm a retro game collector. I've usually got the thing to set up. And the Analog Pocket comes with a little adapter that lets you play Game Gear titles. I'm buying that bitch! Like, I got it day one. And when I got my Analog Pocket and I got the Game Gear adapter, the first game I put in there was Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for Game Gear. The save states meant I could actually get all the emeralds, but also I was able to... The joy never went away, I guess.
Yeah. That's so cool, man. Like, I love that this was such an integral part of your childhood, because so often, as you are very well aware, especially in North America, it's a lot of childhoods are shaped by Nintendo. A lot of gaming childhood was shaped by Nintendo, and still is shaped by Nintendo, because the other big heavy hitters, Xbox, which is barely around now, and Sony, doesn't cater towards kids. So Nintendo is still like, they are still feeding into childhood nostalgia even now. So like,
absolutely.
Sega was the closest thing to competing to that for quite some time, because the other competitors, they're there, and like I there is obviously a place for Sony, but like but if you really think about it, like, North American childhood in terms of video games has been consistently shaped by Nintendo since 1985.
Yeah.
Like, it's and a little bit earlier if you count Donkey Kong and arcade games, but so I can see how we talked a little bit off mic about how, like, you got lots of things that you want to bring up, lots of points you want to bring up about the Game Gear. So I can see why and I don't mean this in a negative light, but you have a bit of a chip on your shoulder about the Game Gear, and you have every right to, because
Mhm.
this system is honestly really cool. I enjoyed my time experimenting around with this in preparation for this episode. In fact, Jen, I went to the store today, my local retro game store, and I picked up 2 Game Gear games that I could try out today
Mhm.
in preparation. I picked up Ariel the Little Mermaid for the Game Gear,
Okay.
and I picked up Garfield Caught in the Act.
Nice.
I did not get around to trying Garfield because right when I popped it in, my wife was like, "Hey, can you help me make dinner?" I'm like, "Sure." So I went down, and then I had to come back up and finish prepping for the episode. So
Of
I only got to
course.
play a little bit of the Little Mermaid game, which was a little lackluster, but it's just my, I think it was more my taste in games versus the game being bad, but
Yeah, that's
mm,
fair.
that's neither here nor there.
Of
But
course.
that's amazing, man. Like I love hearing stories like that. I love hearing about people's childhood nostalgia, especially for something that is like not on the tip of everyone's tongue. And I think
Yeah.
it's I almost like something I'm really passionate about, and I've talked about it on the show a myriad of times, is that when you're preserving game history, the purpose of podcasts, not to toot my own horn, but like not just like my show, but all gaming podcasts, your show, Fun and Games,
Yeah.
our
Well,
buddy
especially
Dave,
side quests.
for side quests. Yeah, it's you, you need to hear people's nostalgia because that's part of the contextual preservation.
Right. You do.
I've said it 1,000 times. Like if in 100 years, if all people see is a cartridge of Animal Crossing New Horizons, and that's the only thing they know about it, even let's say it's perfectly up to date magically with all the updates that since, like, they get one version of the game. As far as I know, there was only ever one version, none of the updates that Nintendo added later on.
Yeah.
They, besides not knowing the context to the updates, without knowing what happened in 2020 with the pandemic, they wouldn't realize how monumental that game was for people when they were isolated in the pandemic, right?
Right.
So whenever I sometimes when I do episodes like this on whether it's consoles or games that are a little bit less represented in the gaming community, in the gaming zeitgeist online,
Mhm.
I'm always grateful for when I'm able to get people who have these personal connections, because that's a huge part of understanding what made whatever the thing that we're talking about what made it what it is. So I
Yeah.
loved hearing that story of your childhood with the Game Gear.
Oh, thank you. No, well, and no, you're absolutely right. I mean, we think about looking back on Shakespeare, and there is reference to things and ideas of things that we have to extrapolate from, and we have a little more context. But Animal Crossing is a great example where Nintendo is, rich and suffused with its own history, and will make reference to itself within its other titles. And so, there is extrapolation, but. Yeah, no, like I'm thinking about this. I keep thinking about this now, and I'm like, all right, what games did I have growing up? I mean, it's the way that it is also, everybody has their own introduction to, frankly, anything. As far as
Mhm.
gaming goes, everyone's got their first game, their first console. In days when there wasn't digital distribution, the games that you got were absolutely the things that you hoarded and worked with. I
Mhm.
mean, the Game Gear was my introduction to playing fighting games for myself, because I had seen Mortal Kombat, I'd seen stuff. It wasn't that I didn't know what they were, but I had an NES, which pretty much the closest thing to a fighting game there was Turtles Tournament Fighters, which I did have as a
Mhm.
kid, but it took a little while. But I had Mortal Kombat 2 and Samurai Showdown for the Game Gear, and by gum, I loved Samurai Showdown for the Game Gear. Is it a good version? That's not for here to decide, but I I learned everybody's moves. I played as everybody. I unlocked stuff. When I discovered that there was a cheat code to unlock the final boss, I lost my mind. You can get just as into those versions and those pieces. And yeah, that's context too. The Sega does a decent job of preserving its history, but not a great job. There have been so many Sega Genesis collections, but those only cover at most 20% of their library, and the Game Gear is even paler. There were 16 games that were on the 3DS Virtual Console, that eShop that still exists.
Mhm.
And the
Well, it
Sega
doesn't
came out.
exist anymore.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. And Sega came out with the Game Gear Micro, and
Yes.
with M2 back in 2020. There were 4 models that each had 4 different games. So
And I think it was only
that's,
released in Japan, wasn't it?
I believe so, exclusively in Japan. So naturally, some things were brought in, and some of those were Japan only. So you're not even covering the domestic releases, which, there were 363 domestic releases for the Game Gear. So there's a lot to be lost and to lose in the shuffle if you weren't there or you're not looking for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's especially like the fact that like if even with the Game Gear Micro that came out, like even that felt like an afterthought compared to everything else, like
Yeah.
it and it's a bummer because like I I don't the Micro I think is really cool. I don't have one. Did you get a Micro? I'm assuming you did.
I didn't. I have seen them in the wild, but they were always sold in places that were a little rich for my blood. I live in New York City, and there's a video game store in Midtown that if you want to find something, they've got it if you have the cash to pay. But it never quite, the mini consoles, they never quite did it for me. So if one shows up in the world and the price is right, I will get one. But it wasn't I was just happy that there was a little more Game Gear in the world,
Yeah. I think my issue with it is just kind of like it's an odd choice to celebrate the Game Gear. Like, why would you make something like that tiny? Like, it's really cool, don't get me wrong, but to me that feels more like you would make something and here's a little fidget spinner. It feels like a fidget spinner by comparison. I know it's not. Like, it plays games. It's an actual game console with a screen and like a D-pad and buttons. But like, it's small as hell from my understanding. So like
it is teeny tiny. It would fit in just about anyone's palm. Like literally their palm could overtake it.
Yeah.
And that is its own kind of goofy thing on, well, the Game Gear was too big. How's that a portable console? Everything else. Well, all right, asshole. Here's the most portable console we can make. But still in all, I agree. It's strange showing.
The Game Gear really wasn't that. I mean, it's big by comparison, but the original Game Boy isn't that much smaller than the Game Gear. Like, it's smaller. Like, I'm not going to debate that. Like, but it's not that much smaller, and it's not like we had jeans back then that could really, until Genco jeans came out in the 90s. It's not like you really had pockets that could have fit the Game Boy too easily. I mean, you did. I know you did because people did, but it just, I don't know. I will. What is it? Oh shit! Hold on. There was something else that you reminded me of, and now I'm brain farting on it. Oh, people. Yeah. I remember now. I'll jump back in here. And the other thing with the Game Gear is it was very intentional by Sega that they designed it honestly meticulously at how the thing was supposed to feel in your hands and the physical weight of it. Like infamously the Atari Lynx, like that system has a lot of dead space, like just unnecessary girth to that thing. It's not heavy.
She large.
She a thick girl.
Yeah, well, and people talk about how the Game Boy succeeded in all of its iterations, the original, the Pocket, Color, Advance, by Gunpei Yokoi's philosophy of lateral thinking with withered technology. How they're able to get more battery life using less powerful chips and things that didn't draw power as much. But and the Game Gear is very much in the firing line for an example of why that failed. You get that, the PSP and any of those. But just about an even more. And the Atari Lynx was functionally a 16-bit console. It had polygons and sprite scaling, for God's sakes. And that was the first one to come out of the competitors. It came out back in 1989.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point, Jen, when we were talking off mic with this. There's a reason why people don't remember the competitors. So for a real quick, like to add some context to this as to when the Game Gear came out. The Game Boy came out in 1989, the same year as the Atari Lynx. So that I actually found really interesting because that to me means that Atari was considering making this before Nintendo released the Game Boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Game Boy came out in April of 1989 in Japan and July of 1989 in North America. And the Atari Lynx came out on September 1st, 1989. So
Yeah.
like that's not like Atari saw the Game Boy and was like, okay, we're going to make our own now, and decided to make it. This was like they were working on something for quite a while
Well,
versus
Epix was.
Epic. Sorry. Yes. Epic's.
But then Atari picked it up because they saw the writing on the wall, as it were. So, like, yeah, no, but this was still taking a long time.
Yes. Um, so this wasn't like necessarily made with the intention to compete against the Lynx wasn't, excuse me, to
Yeah.
compete against the Game Boy. It did because it came out the same year, but like the Game Gear is very directly and intentional. They saw what Nintendo did with the Game Boy and were like, all right, we'll make something. And
Mm-hmm.
then like I'm sure they started before the Game Boy came out because obviously Nintendo had been promoting and advertising it prior to the release date, but still the Game Gear is a response to the Game Boy, and the Atari Lynx came out at the same time. It just kind of like got buried underneath because it was, so much more expensive than the Game Boy by like a wide fucking margin. It was like $180. The Lynx was $180 at launch, which is equivalent to $470 in 2025, and the
Yeah.
Game Boy was only $90 at launch, which is equivalent to $234 in 2025. Like that is a huge difference
It's a double, yeah.
in price. And then NEC comes out with the Turbo Express in 1990, just a few months later in December. Oh, sorry, not just a few months, over a year later, December of 1990. That was released at $250 back when it first came off, which is even more expensive than the Lynx was.
Yeah.
At the
But
time.
it had a different intention.
What was its intention? Because I didn't have a Turbo Graphics or a Turbo Express, excuse me.
Well, I mean, they're functionally the same thing, which I think is the intention. The Turbo Express never had games of its own. It was a portable version of the
It's essentially
TurboGrafx.
like
It played the
Nomad.
HuCarts. Yeah, this was the first time where we had, the Sega Nomad can be pointed to as, a precursor to the Switch in that, it can go on the TV but can also go handheld. Well, the Turbo Express was that same idea and had an even bigger capacitor problem than the Game Gear by all reports. I've never seen it personally. I know it by reputation. But yeah, the notion of this is as powerful and plays your home console games on the go, that has a little bit more of a deluxe feeling to it. So if you're going to sell it like that, and already with a cartridge or library install base, you can sell it a little differently.
Yeah, yeah. So I totally forgot about that. Yeah, so it wasn't its own separate hardware system. It was just this is literally plays games for your home console on the go.
Yeah.
And the point that I'm not going to take the point that you made off, Mike. I'm going to throw it over to you for this, but you made a really interesting point as to when people think back to this generation of handheld wars, whatever you want to talk about it, because between the Game Boy, Game Gear, the Lynx, and the Turbo Express, it's interesting that the Game Gear kind of gets shit on a lot more than the others. And you had a really, I agree with your theory. You had an interesting theory. Why? Could you talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. The main thing that we were talking about off mic that brought this up was battery life, because you put out a call on a lot of different networks to get memories from people about the Game Gear. And a lot of what you got back, you did get some very nice, genuine responses, but you got a lot of, all I remember is bad battery, lol, essentially.
Yes.
And, I mean, to be fair, the Game Gear used 6 AA batteries and would last about 3 to 5 hours. Pulling this information from Wikipedia, the TurboGrafx, I mean, it also was a bit of a battery hog. It used 6 AA batteries for about 3 to 5 hours. And then, I mean, the Atari Lynx, like that massive mamma jamma, like, think about what that took. 6 AA batteries lasting about 3 to 5 hours. Wouldn't you know it? All of these handhelds had about the same power draw to them. People have all kinds of things to shit on Lynx or Turbo Express if they do, but the reason the Game Gear gets a lot of this flack is it actually lasted. It was not a failed system. It failed in comparison to Game Boy. It absolutely failed in comparison to Game Boy. Most things fail in comparison to Game Boy when you consider sales figures and install base. But going by similar sales numbers, by comparison, the Game Gear over its lifespan sold about as well as the Nintendo Wii U did.
And people would call the Wii U. I understand what you're saying, but technically the Wii U was a quote unquote failed console by modern standpoint, by modern context. But I do think, the landscape is very different with this, right?
Absolutely. And it is the best selling handheld of that era. It is second to Game Boy by a wide margin. And it has a lot of memorable games, not necessarily Tetris or Pokemon, but plenty of memorable games. It's, wasn't a smashing success, not a classic for the ages or anything else, but it was not a failure. It succeeded long enough to actually stick around in the cultural zeitgeist, and thus its shortcomings can be seen and pointed to, and shortcomings that really weren't unique. But this was the one that poked up high enough. This was the poppy that grew tall enough to be cut.
That's exactly what I found so interesting about your point. It lived long enough to become a punching bag. Yes. The others did not. And by comparison, if we're going by the systems at the time, the Game Boy and its family, including Game Boy Color and its variants, sold 118 million units. Like it's by comparison, like the PS3 didn't sell that much, right? Like there is a lot of PS3. Obviously, the PS2 did. I'm gonna have to double check, but I'm pretty sure from the list of like top selling game consoles, Game Boy is still in the top 10.
It absolutely is. But you also have Game Boy and Game Boy Color taken together, and consider the context of like, okay, no, Game Boy had some truly spectacular titles, but let me think about this for just a second.
Game Boy and Game Boy Color is in fourth place with 118 million. The consoles that beat it are the DS, the Switch, and the PS2. Technically, the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color beat the PS4. It beat the PlayStation. It beat the Wii. It beat the PS5. That's not quite as surprising. Beat the PS3, the 360, the GBA, the PSP, the 3DS. Like all of these things that are considered not now. None of these systems are considered failures. The reason why the Game Gear kind of gets shit on is because it sold about 14 million units worldwide, approximately.
Yeah.
Which, like you said, Jen, is about what the Wii U did. Technically, it outsold the Wii U. Wii U sold 13.5 million, apparently.
Yeah.
So it technically outsold the Wii U. Just saying, but I don't think. I think the point is that 13 to 14 million for a system that was competing against the Game Boy is nothing to sneeze at, especially comparing it to its competitors at the time, where the Turbo Express sold 1.5 million units and the Atari Lynx only sold 2 million. So both of them sold less than a seventh of what, or seventh, would that be the right term? Yeah.
1/7, yeah.
Yeah, seventh. Sold a seventh and or less of what the Game Gear did. And don't get me wrong, the Game Boy completely like wiped the floor with it. I would be curious to know if you removed Game Boy Color from the mix, what it would be, but that's hard. Like, I don't know if those numbers are available because technically the Game Boy Color is an upgraded Game Boy. They're tied together because it wasn't a huge, it was almost like, to me, it's kind of like the PS4 and the PS4 Pro, or the PS5 and the PS5 Pro, right? Like that's, so I can understand why they're kind of like tied together a bit, but the Game Boy Color didn't come out until 1998, which was after the
Game Gear had been sunset, basically.
I would be curious to see like how close would these numbers be without Pokemon?
I agree, and I'm also looking at right now the Wikipedia list of the best-selling Game Boy games themselves. And another thing to think about is context. One of the big things that is often forgotten when talking about this kind of history is what a shot in the arm Pokemon was. They
Yes.
were Game Boy sales were slowing down significantly. There were tons of great titles that were released during this same concurrent time. I mean, considering the things that were released in 1989, yes, Tetris came out. It was a launch title, or functionally so, and was a pack-in title. It was amazing. But also that year we had Tennis, Alleyway, which was basically Breakout, Super Mario Land, which wasn't bad. But let's compare that and call that, is that what was so much better? It's a good game. I love it. But it's no Super Mario Land 2. That didn't come out till 1992. And even into 1990, there are still great titles, but they're not necessarily the ones that everybody talks about. So when you have as long of a lifespan as the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color did and does, there was a greater opportunity for people to get to know the system. And yes, that lateral thinking with withered technology to go. But if we're talking about intention, the Game Gear did pretty damn well, I'd say.
Yeah, I would say I kind of equate the Game Gear to what what is it? Not the why am I blanking on the name of it? Not the Sega Master System, the original system that came out the same time as the Famicom.
I think the Master System, the Mark III.
No, that's the Mark III, but there was the Mark 1 and 2 were different. It's oh my gosh. It's going to drive me up a goddamn wall that I can't remember what it is. SG-1000. There we go.
SG-1000, yes.
Like, where the SG-1000 didn't, like, it was nowhere near close to the Famicom, but it sold better than Sega anticipated. And so they continued on with it. And eventually that ended up moving towards, obviously the Master System and then eventually the Genesis. And I almost kind of equate the Game Gear to the SG-1000 in that it didn't sell nearly as well as its competitor, but it still was a success. Like, it was not a failure of a system based off how much they invested into it. I would assume for Game Gear, I'm speculating on that, because it lasted 7 years. Like, a failure doesn't last 7 years. The main reason I would assume the Game Gear died is because Sega died. It wasn't because the Game Gear completely lost everything. It's because Sega, the 1995 happened, right? Sega 1995 happened, and that is like the year where everything kind of pivoted. Then the events leading up to Sega 1995. So it's the context in which the Game Gear came out kind of put it at a disadvantage, because obviously Nintendo was at the height of its power when the Game Boy came out, right? And the Game Boy sold gangbusters. It had Tetris. Sega tried to compete with Columns, and Columns didn't have the same success as Tetris. I think just in general, there was a lot of things that Sega did that were like, they had good ideas. They made some good games for the Game Gear. They were trying to compete in a way they thought would work, and ultimately it didn't. I mean, it's like we said, it still is a success, and almost because it's success, oh my gosh, and almost because of its success, but because it was nowhere near Game Boy, it's become this punching bag, like you said, and it's very frustrating, and I can see how you, as a fan of this, would be very frustrated about it.
I'm open about the fact that it is imperfect. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect game. I swear this up and down. There's perfect games for you, but there's no such thing as a perfect game. And even if we got into a shouting match amongst people, folks, whatever, about things, and you want to really convince me the Game Gear is not a success, I might concede that ground. But I will die on the hill that it was not a failure.
No, I think it also, like, you found enjoyment out of it, and like, in all honesty, so I in preparation for this as well, because I can't go out and buy all the Game Gear games or play them all. I was watching GameSack's video on YouTube, and it's like a 40-minute long video, and it's a great like look at the Game Gear library, and there's a lot of cool stuff that didn't come over here. That there's like some cool RPGs that came out on the Game Gear. Like, looking at some of the games that came out, I was really impressed by it. Like, I think what's crazy about the system is that it gets a bad rap because of the batteries, and justifiably so. The 6AA batteries for 3 to 5 hours is bad. There's
Yes.
no way around that. It also kind of shipped with bad capacitors, which was the norm at the time. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's why you were saying like the NEC Turbo Express has bad capacitors. Like
Mm,
that was the norm at the time. But what made it special on the opposite end, those were the negative sides. It was fully backlit, which was like unheard of at the time. I believe the Atari Lynx was as well,
I
but
do want to slightly argue that point.
go ahead.
It is not backlit. It is frontlit, like the Game
Oh,
Boy Advance
yes.
SP was. And this is also one of those. This is one of my favorite facts to share with people because, yet again, not everyone's as obsessed with the Game Gear as I am. And many people are more obsessed, but here we go. Welcome. The Game Gear's light, when one of the reasons why it would run hot and it sucked batteries, the light was a fluorescent tube. It had a
Oh,
little tiny pasta thin fluorescent tube along the top of the screen. And so it wasn't like a backlit LCD screen or anything else. That's how it worked. And when people make mods to the systems, and there's actually a very nice mod community out there, you can get capacitor kits for not that much to do a little bit of electrical work yourself. You're signing up for that to get a lot of the problems with the Game Gear cleared up there. And if you just replace the screen or get a different kind of like an LED front light for it, the battery life shoots upward. It doubles at least, if not more. So it's a fun, but I mean, look, that front light's amazing. This was how I was able to play in the backseat of a dark car or under the covers in my room or wherever I wanted to play it. So
yeah.
I'd like clearing up that point, and because I find the fact when I discovered that it was a fluorescent tube, I just about lost my mind. It was wow.
That honestly does explain a little bit, because I will say
Right?
also one of the downsides for me with the Game Gear is that its screen isn't that great. I always found it a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just mine or if it's like every Game
No,
Gear is like that.
it was a
But
little smeary, yeah, and the light kind of washed it out a little more than we realized.
yeah. And I think that's a bummer, because when I was watching GameSack's video on it, they had an RGB modded Game Gear that would output so they could capture like the raw video of it. And man, the visuals on this thing are amazing. Like,
Gorgeous, crisp.
really great 8-bit, like it's like almost like what's the I guess what would it be, like 12-bit, right? Like it's in between 8 and 16. Like it's
Certainly as
definitely
far as
8-bit. Like I
colors, yeah.
understand 12-bit's not a thing, but bear with me, listeners.
Yeah.
It's looking at some of the visuals of it is just absolutely impressive. Now they do talk about it in the one, I think it was like one of the Sonic games, or maybe it was like Echo the Dolphin or something like that. Like you see these weird blue lines on the screen, and they're like, well, that's there because when you're looking at it on the original monitor, the original screen, it looked transparent. It's kind of like when game developers would design their visuals for CRT televisions, and
Yep.
with the scan lines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Same diff. Like they were designed for the handheld, so when you're playing it off of that, it loses a little bit of the something in terms of like the way the visuals were meant to be. But with that said, there was a lot of games that just looked really nice, just really, and the I don't know what the resolution of it, like what the aspect ratio for is off the top of my head. I should probably have looked that up. It's 160 by 144 is what the pixels, 160p by 144p was its resolution, which is once again less than most consoles. Most consoles output at 240p. But it's what is it? I don't know if because of that resolution it's the reason for this, but some of the pixels looked a little bit like, or the sprites, excuse me, look a little bit scrunched, but like
Yes.
not in an unpleasant way. Like when I'm looking at, like, for example, like Sonic the Hedgehog on the Game Gear, which, fun fact for those who don't know, the Sonic games like Sonic 1 and 2 are completely different games than what you got on the Genesis / Mega Drive. They are like almost from top to bottom, not entirely, but almost from top to bottom. They are different games with different levels. Apparently the company that made them on the Game Gear was Yuzo Koshiro's company, so he did the music for it, and it's
Yep.
fucking great.
Oh yeah, the tunes on them are fantastic. It's so funny. Sonic the Hedgehog, the first one for Game Gear / Master System, because these were also Master System titles. They're the 8-bit Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and Sonic Chaos as well. Triple Trouble was the main line Sonic game on Game Gear that was exclusive to it. But the first Sonic the Hedgehog game for 8-bit systems has an auto-scroller level.
Ooh.
Which, yeah, Bridge Act 2, so second area, second zone, second act, is an auto-scroller in a Sonic the Hedgehog game. Gotta go fast to the end of the screen till it moves a little more. Then gotta go, yeah.
It is worth noting, too, that, like, because something to note, actually, real quick. Did you know that I think, where did I see this on? I think it might have been in the Gaming Historian's video for the Sonic games on the Game Gear. He talks about it. The second level in Sonic, it's one of
the music in Bridge sounds a lot like a Janet Jackson song.
It was sampled for a Janet Jackson song, I believe.
Right. There is, yes, I'm a little, but the dun 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 dun, that's Bridge. That's the same zone.
Yep. And I thought that was wild to see.
But it is very funny, and you talking about the resolution as well, I believe, because certainly a lot of early titles for the Game Gear were Master System games because they shared a chipset, and in the same way that the Genesis used the Master System chip as its sound processor, so all you needed was a pass-through accessory, so too for the Game Gear, just a slightly different way. And so for some of those, they just cut some of the pixels down, cut the resolution down. Anybody who has played Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on Game Gear will have a trauma response to the antlion boss at the end of Underground Zone. And when you play that on a Master System screen, you're just like, this is why it's the first level. It's so much easier. Yeah.
That's funny. I did in the Gaming Historian's video for it, he did talk about how there's a lot more blind jumps in Sonic 2 than there was on Sonic 1.
There definitely is. Yes, they designed it much more, they were more confident, and it was for the Master System and then brought to the Game Gear. And also for those listening that this is your first time knowing that these are different versions, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on Game Gear Master System was the first appearance of Tails. Historically, it was the first one released with Tails.
That blew my mind when I heard that. I had no idea.
These were things, again, that I learned because, I had a Sega system, and during the good days of Sega, a Genesis, nope. You're right to say I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder, so I like knowing these facts.
I do not blame you. I would also want to know them as well.
Take that pride.
So some other quick fun facts about at least the hardware of the system. As much as, a lot of, the side lit stuff that you're talking about and the full color are the reasons for the bad battery life. But something else that's underrated with the full color is that its color palette, it can only display 32 colors at a time, only, which was more than the NES from my understanding. I believe the NES, it was like 12 or 16? What am I?
I think it was only 16. That's off the top of my head, though.
I will double check that so I don't completely get people mad at us. But while it could only display 32 colors at once, it had a color palette of 4,096.
Yeah,
that's and to put that in context, listeners, that is more than the Genesis. That is more than so much. That's crazy if you think about it like that. That's so much.
Yeah. Double checking here. The NES could do 13 colors for sprites and 13 for background.
Okay. So 13 for sprites and so 26, I guess, would be technically.
And I believe one of those was for transparencies. So 24 to 26.
So it was technically more than the NES, which
Yes.
once again, this is like a handheld Master System, so that's kind of cool. But the Master System also, I believe, was more graphically capable than the NES, from my understanding. At least, straight out of the box. I know the NES got improvements through their MMC chips.
Right, exactly.
But that's a different story for a different day. But yeah, the system was capable of producing 4,096 colors. That's absolutely crazy. And when I was watching GameSack's video on it and just seeing all the variety in games, that it was noticeable, man. Like, it was really noticeable, like how visually distinctive, especially the color palettes were of all the games on there. Like, it was really cool to see. Like, I really enjoyed getting to see the variety of visuals and graphics and just gameplay styles. I mean, we're talking about the color palette, I know, but still, it was cool to see all that.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the games that I had growing up was Game Gear came out with 3 X-Men titles that were different than the X-Men titles that were on the Genesis, and I had the first one. And the fact that it had such a vibrant color palette, when you played as different X-Men, the color they were was the color they were in the comics, and it allowed for the sprites to be a little smaller, which is useful for, like we were talking about with the resolution of the Game Gear, but it still was very distinctly. Nightcrawler had the red, the white, the blue of all of those pieces. Wolverine was very distinct, and I could tell it was him, which, feels like, oh, yeah, great, cool colors. But that pop was important, and it had good readability, which, again, we were talking about the screen, which did well, but not great. It was important.
Something else to talk about with it as well are just the crazy amount of accessories the system had. Like, you already touched on it, Jen, with the battery packs and the rechargeable battery pack and stuff like that. You had the rechargeable one, though, right?
No, I had the power back. The rechargeable battery pack was something that was, oh goodness, how big was it? It was just like this big tube that you could put more AA's into that plugged into the AC adapter. It was just kind of a free hang-in dongle. So not very portable.
GameSack described it as a dildo.
You know what? I wasn't going to directly go there, but if, with enough lube, anything's possible. And it is
How's
not...
that for a motivational speaker? With enough lube, anything can be a dildo. Sorry.
Don't let your dreams be dreams. But it is not
speaker
unfriendly.
No one wanted.
Why do they keep bringing him back to the elementary school? I don't like that person. But the rechargeable battery pack is not an unfriendly shape for that kind of use, but it is an unfriendly shape for portable gaming. The power back had a little screw that there was a screw hole in the back of the Game Gear that, much like the expansion port on the bottom of the NES, people probably just thought, a thing. I don't need it. But that was what held it in place. And then there was a short jump cable from the output of the power back to the AC adapter input on the Game Gear. And then the power back had its own AC adapter output. It would allow for, I would say, about 8 hours of gameplay. And it had 2 charging modes, normal and fast. Normal took about 6 to 8 hours to fully charge, but you also were able to play the Game Gear while it was doing that. So if you had a car adapter, you could just keep playing endlessly, or what have you, or next to the wall at your grandparents' house, like I did. Mm-hmm. But there was also a fast mode that took about 2 hours to fully charge, but you couldn't turn on the Game Gear then. It wasn't drawing any power from it. But that was useful. And, that's perfectly, if you're just charging overnight, who cares? But and like I said, it felt, the freedom it gave me that I didn't know I had was phenomenal. And it really only ran into any kinds of issues when I got a Game Genie, because it was a big enough cartridge that it went down the back of the Game Gear. So that's when I first really reckoned with that little screw that, you just had to make it thumb tight. So I didn't need a screwdriver or anything. It was a big chunky flathead that I could just do that, pull that out, and then try to figure it out from there. But no, it nice and in place.
Now, I will say the rechargeable battery pack. I know you were talking about the one that you had, which was just the power back.
Right.
Um, but the rechargeable battery pack, it did have a belt clip, so you could like clip it onto your belt and just walk around with it around on your waist. So it wasn't like
You're right, it did.
so that was at least handy for that. And it apparently inside of it had a Sanyo Kadnica 7.2 volt 1600. I don't know what MAH stands for. Ni-CD battery in it. So according to smspower.org. So I don't know if that's accurate.
That's
or
right.
not.
It was a rechargeable battery pack. You're right. Now I have one. I picked one up in an old. It's probably the shaping of it. If you want to imagine something that's family friendly, it's like a really long computer mouse.
Yes.
Like that's sort of like nub to the front, and that's also about how wide it is. Think of an old computer mouse and then just kind of make it about 10 inches long.
Yeah, I would say it's an abnormally long computer mouse. That is a much more PC way to describe it. I like that. It's also worth noting that if you wanted to forego battery usage, you could just plug it into the wall with a power adapter, with an AC adapter. If you didn't want to buy one, you could actually just use your Genesis Model 2 power adapter. If you already had the Sega Genesis Model 2, that is the exact same power adapter as the Game Gear. So you could actually, when I was prepping for this episode, Jen, that's what I was using.
I mean, makes sense. A lot of the Game Gears nowadays, the battery contacts are a little corroded, and those can usually be salvaged. But if you happen to have a Model 2 Genesis adapter and you're not trying to take this on public transit, that is more than useful.
I mean, I'm sure there's probably some outlets on trains. I don't know if you want to plug
on
in
trains. There absolutely is. Yeah.
That'd be. Oh my God, man! If it wasn't like. Imagine seeing somebody with this like now, like I'm not talking 1991, I'm talking 2026. You're taking the subway, you're taking the train somewhere, and you just see someone break out a Game Gear and have it plugged into a wall.
Man, that would be
that person
that
would be
the subway
friend.
Story for the day. Yeah,
person would be my best friend. Some of the other cool accessories they had, though, they had the TV tuner, which is really fucking cool, because back in the day, children, I'm not going to do that whole bit. I get tired when I see people, like back when I was young, and like, bitch, you're like 35. You're not that old. Like, come on now.
You
like,
are and you aren't.
I'm 37. I still don't feel that old.
Yeah. No, I'm nearly 40, and I am both very old and very young, and so it doesn't matter.
That's the way I look at it too.
Yeah. The TV tuner was pretty funny because that was the day, that was in the heyday of little portable TVs, go on a fishing trip with the family and, grandpa needs to watch the football game. And in fact, the advertisements for the TV tuner that were in the little insets and things in your Sega games, it usually had football on it. So it was functionally, I think it was meant as a more adult accessory in that way. It wouldn't let you connect to, you couldn't watch Nickelodeon on it. It wasn't a cable TV. It had an antenna on it. You could watch, basic network channels.
But it was back in the day when like TV was actually broadcast over airwaves. Like it's not like now where everything's digital through the internet. It was actual broadcast television. So if you wanted to, theoretically, there was some motherfucker out there who watched Friends when it was in its original run on the TV tuner through their Game Gear. I'm just saying.
You could, yeah. Odds are nice.
Because Friends was on what, NBC or whatever. It was on one of the networks.
Yeah.
It wasn't a cable show. So like,
yeah,
it was stuff like that. If you want to watch fucking Saturday morning cartoons on the Game Gear, you could do that. It was awesome. I really wish I could have had one. They did have an extender for this too, by the way. You could get the car antenna, which would allow it to travel further, essentially just to amplify the TV tuner signal. So nothing like too crazy with that. There was also an FM receiver, which allowed you to listen to the radio through your Game Gear, which is really cool. You already touched on the car adapter, Jen. There is also the Master Gear converter, which was basically a way to play Sega Master System games on your Game Gear, kind of like the power base converter for
Right.
the Master System to Genesis.
And if you look at a picture of the Master Gear converter, you would see that it has like a little blue cog on the bottom of it, and that would be the same screw idea that the Power Back had.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could have a little bit more of a stable connection there. So it kind of would plug into the Game Gear cart slot, and then just the full back of your Game Gear, minus where your hands go, is where you would put the cartridge. It was a pretty nice design.
I don't think the Game Gear is uncomfortable, man. Like, I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, but it's honestly surprisingly ergonomic.
It is. Well, I mean, a lot of people, when they mod old Game Boys, the ideal one that people go for is the Game Boy Advance. It has the power to play all of the older games, and it's the only Game Boy that had that landscape form factor, which was honestly far more comfortable. It's one of the reasons the Game Gear is that way.
It's like, I'm holding my Game Gear right now, man. It is genuinely still very, very comfortable. Like,
no arguments here.
It's definitely a little bit it's too big for a handheld sort of ish, but not really. Though I wish we were on camera right now. We're not recording on with video. I wish I could show you. I actually do have a Game Gear, like an official Sega Game Gear carrying case.
Ooh. Oh, which one? Is it the big flat one?
I don't know, actually. I will, you know what? I don't remember anymore. It's somewhere. I can't see it right now. I know I have
a couple of them.
So after we're done recording, I will take a look at it and I'll send you some pictures.
Please do. Yeah, there's one that, like, it kind of just looks like it's like a nylon briefcase. And just like big foam inserts. It's wild.
I think it might be that. I don't remember. I will take a look at it when I get a chance to. But yeah, those are just some of the accessories for the Game Gear. And I think we should move on now, Jen, to just talking about some of the specific games. Any games that like kind of really stick out to either one of us. As I kind of said at the top of the episode, and it's not going to be a surprise to you listeners, I don't have a lot of experience with this. So like, my experience is just playing a handful. I have in the show notes, like, the Sonic the Hedgehog game is I really enjoy. There's not too much more for that for me, though. I did try out. I have Predator 2 for the Game Gear.
Ooh,
and I was
don't know
like,
that
what
one
is
at all.
that like? It's a top-down kind of run and gun shooter, right? It's kind of like almost it's slightly isometric. It's not isometric. You know how isometric, like when you hit up, they go like diagonal up to the right. No, this is still all your same cardinal directions as whatnot, but it's almost like that RTS camera angle where it's not perfectly top down. It's like mostly top down, but angled slightly in one way, type of thing.
Yeah.
It's like that. And I'm guessing you play as Danny Glover. I don't know. I don't know if they even paid attention to Predator 2, because Danny Glover's the main guy in it. And I let me tell you, he was already too old for this shit in Lethal Weapon. I don't think they're going to have that man running around, but who knows?
But that's just, that's video games.
I mean, you play as a dude running around, and you just kind of you shoot other guys, you collect power-ups. I was able to pick up a machine gun. I didn't even beat the first level. I was just kind of like putzing around with it. What is cool though is that the little 3 red dots from the Predator's like laser gun, where their homing laser or whatever it is, they show up on the screen periodically, and it is a little weird because it's completely not the right size. It's like the size of, if for those who remember what that homing laser, guiding laser, whatever thing looks like, it's like 3 red dots that are almost in like a triangle type pattern. They have that appear on screen, but just one of those dots is larger than your character. So it's like, it makes it seem like the thing's going to shoot like a nuke down on you, because it's this giant red like triangle, like 3-dot triangle that just appears on screen. But it's really cool. That was kind of cool. The Sonic games are good. I do know people are a fan of the Mickey game for it, Land of Illusion or whatever.
Yeah, the sterling reputation that Disney games had on the Genesis really carry over onto the Game Gear. I have not played them all, but the ones that I grew up with Aladdin, Lion King, and The Jungle Book. And I would say the one that came out the best out of the three would be Aladdin. Lion King is truly a shrunk down version of the Genesis game. And because people were forgetting about the Game Gear all the time, they didn't devise the monkey puzzle in the second stage to be impossible. So, yet again, one of those things that a meme of Genesis ownership and Genesis gaming that I completely missed because I was just playing the little Game Gear. And so Lion King's one of the early games that I beat. Aladdin actually is kind of a fun exploration style game where Genesis was pushing a lot of like the blast processing idea, like big, fast, whatever. Game Gear did do that, but there was also more exploratory platformers. The main reason why someone would have the audacity to put an auto-scroller in Sonic the Hedgehog at all is the Game Gear Sonic games were a little more exploratory platformers. It still was go fast, get to the end of the stage, find the Chaos Emeralds, but there was a slight shift, and I personally enjoyed it. And so the Mickey Mouse games also carry that through. There was Deep Duck Trouble. There was all kinds of other Disney titles, much like the Genesis, that were just as good on the Game Gear.
Something that surprised me in fiddling around with the Game Gear in preparation for this and some of the games, while the hit detection on a lot of these games wasn't the best, what impressed me was actually the controls. When you were talking about with Sonic, how like it's not like go fast Sonic, they kind of pivoted to a more platforming centric one, which I'll argue my hot take is that Sonic has always been that, just no one wants to admit it.
Yes, thank you.
Sonic, like Sega Genesis Sonic, the first two levels are go fast, and maybe the second zone, like the first two zones, we'll say.
Marble Zone is hurry up and wait. You're stepping on buttons to open gates.
Yeah, dude, freaking, especially in Sonic 1. Sonic 2, they I played recently, which that episode will be out later this year for Backlog Month, but I played and beat Sonic 2 for the first time recently. Sorry, to clarify, I've played Sonic 2 a lot, even in my childhood, but it was the first time I beat it was in preparation for the episodepisode coming out later this year. It is a lot like Sonic 1 is a lot more precision platformer heavy. Sonic 2 balances that out a lot more nicely, in my opinion. But I'll save all that for actually that episode's already recorded. That's how far in advance I recorded that one. Anyway, but playing this, I was very pleasantly surprised at how responsive and how tight controlled Sonic felt in this. I was really, because the Master System's D-pad is bullshit. It is awful.
Yes, it is.
This
mushy.
This one is surprisingly responsive. I was pleasantly surprised by it. I'm not going to say it's as good as the Game Boy's D-pad, but Nintendo had a patent on it. They couldn't do the same thing. They had to find a workaround, and by all means, I think they did a lot better on this than they did on the Game Gear, because the Game Gear's D-pad is not Game Gear. I'm sorry. The Master System's they did a lot better here on the Game Gear than they did on the Master System, because the Master System's D-pad, as I said before, is bullshit. It's awful.
Yeah, I haven't had a ton of time with it, but it's not my favorite. But no, the Game Gear still holds up on that. It's responsive. It's good. It allows for 8 directions. It's a damn workable.
Absolutely, man. I'm trying to think if there's any other games that I really enjoyed, but like out of the ones that I played, I also do have Sonic. Is it not? What is it? Chaos? Sonic Chaos?
Sonic Chaos, yes.
I have that boxed, like complete in box.
That's the thing. Sega Game Gear games are surprisingly easy to find complete in box.
It's not that expensive of a console to buy for.
Right. There are definitely some outliers. Like if you're trying to get your hands on Mega Man for Game Gear, save up for it. But as far as that's one of the other nice things. It is such a weird little oddball that's got actually some really nice titles that but for the most part, you're not going too crazy. Like I'm pulling up price charting right now so we can get.
I literally just did that too. I sorted by most expensive, and most
Yeah.
expensive are the systems themselves, but the games that are up there, there's two games that are above. Like the most expensive thing is the Supersonic Sports Pack. That's apparently loose for that. It's like $280. Mega Man, like you said, Jen, is $243 loose. If you go for Jesus Christ, complete in box for that is $1,500.
Cardboard boxes do not always last, you know?
One game I did not play this. I literally only want to play this because just because of the name. CJ Elephant Fugitive.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. I don't understand what any of like those assembling of letters is just foreign to me. It's apparently a platform game that was originally for the Commodore 64.
Yeah, it is a Codemasters title. The cover of it is beautiful. It promises a huge comic world of fantastic action.
I am so enamored with whatever this is. But then the next one couples down are like, more systems. Then you have Pete Sampras Tennis, which it is very rare that you see a tennis game or a sports game of any type being like one of the rarer games on a system.
I call memes. I don't know why, but yeah. But yeah, you got that. You've got Fantastic Dizzy, which is another older title brought forth.
That's another
C64 title.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of they're like brothers who made the Dizzy games. I cannot remember it for the life of me. But then after that, it's all like Tails Adventure. Tails, his own game. Tails got his own game on this.
It's an early Metroidvania. It's actually pretty fun.
Really?
Yeah, it really leans into Tails' personality as an inventor and a machinist. And so all of the things you find are weird little like weapons and vehicles.
That's so cool. And to put in perspective, funky. Listeners, while this is like Tails Adventure is one of the more pricey games for the system, it's like, let me see, Mega Man's number 1, CJ Elephant number 2, Pete Sampras Tennis is number 3, Fantastic Disney is number 4, Tails is number 5, and it's only $69. Which, don't get me wrong, that still is a chunk of change. Like that $70 ain't nothing to sneeze at, but comparatively to like other game libraries, that's really not bad.
And if you are somebody that does go into like virtual console libraries or anything else, Tails Adventure was one of the 16 games available on the 3DS virtual console, which is how I got to play it.
Man, there's a lot. Like, I'm just looking at the list here of like some of the top stuff, like the Ristar game or Ristar is real. Like, what is it? Freaking GameSack talked about this. It looks really good. Sonic Labyrinth. I have no idea about Sonic Labyrinth, but that looks kind of interesting. It looks like a pinball type of game, maybe, or like a.
No, it's not quite that. Hold on.
More like a Marble Madness pinball type of thing.
That's a little closer to it. It's not quite like a Sonic Blast sort of title, but it is an isometric mover.
Okay.
But it's an interesting one. But also, among some of these more expensive ones, they're fun to point out because they are notions of interesting adaptation. There is a Shining Force game for the Game Gear. There is an Oasis game for it as well. And like Shining Force, sort of, I have no idea how to pronounce that. Hajya, Haja, Haya. I am terribly sorry. But it's a Shining Force Gaiden game. And it is a top-down RPG, like turn-based kind of thing, versus the tactics of... And there were actually a couple of RPGs and sort of dungeon crawly adventures. You had things like Crystal Warriors on the... Was it Crystal Warriors or Dragon Warrior? I always forget these.
There's oh my gosh, because I literally saw it's Crystal Warriors.
Crystal Warriors is a tactical RPG on the Game Gear.
Yeah.
There was all of these. One of the early titles that I have had a lot of fun with after finding it as an adult, Devilish, which is sort of a progressive breakout game with a story to it.
And that's another one that they mentioned in in the GameSack video. There's a lot of cool stuff. Like that's what I was saying at the top of the episode, was just that I was very surprised by just how much like how much variety there is to the gameplay. Like, in all honesty, like as much as I like the Game Boy, I feel like this might have a little bit more variety because I feel like the Game Boy is filled with a lot more puzzle type of stuff, right?
Oh yeah, those were the age of, if you want a fun deep dive into actually both Game Boy and Game Gear, Jeremy Parish's works videos on
Yes.
all this are fantastic. And yet again, we're talking a lot about trying to find the context here, and his deep dives into a lot of these titles and trying to do it chronologically gives you a sense of what was coming out at the time. And yes, a lot of early Game Boy titles and a lot of titles of that time were Sokoban clones, were pushing boxes. And a lot of the Game Boy competitors can kind of be characterized by a genre of game or style of game. Probably the other intriguing one, which actually Jeremy Parish is going into right now, is the Neo Geo Pocket. But due to the company that put it out, it's a lot of fighting games and some cool sports games too. So if that's not your cup of tea, it's a fun bit of tech, but it's not necessarily the thing you go to as a gaming device or as a big, deep library. Sega, I would argue, always took big swings and often did things at the wrong time where, Sega Channel was the precursor to a lot of online setups for games nowadays, but trying to do it over coax was a certain kind of madness.
What are you talking about? It worked out great.
We're doing great, all doing great. But the Game Gear had plenty of Game Boy style shrunk down adaptations, and in some cases true adaptations or ports. And using that, they had a wide variety of genres of play experiences. Is it plagued by a lot of like mid-platformers? Yes! All games of that time were. It is of the time and lacking certain per se standout titles. Like, what two games we haven't talked about yet at all that I would argue were some of the finest on the system? The Shinobi titles.
Mm-hmm.
Shinobi 1 and Shinobi 2 for the Game Gear were separate enough from the mainline Shinobi that they are called the GG Shinobis. The Game Gear Shinobis, they are very cool exploratory platformers where you start off as one ninja rescuing 4 more, each having a different weapon that helps for traversal and a magic power that also helps with traversal. Yet again, a bit of a stage select Metroidvania exploratory idea. It's very funny that one of the big pieces of history or the way that the Game Gear is remembered is its poor battery life, because there are some setups on here that actually make for some great dig-in play sessions, which might have heard it as a handheld console. A lot of Game Boy games were made to be pick up and put down, where I remember how many times I tried to start and make it all the way through Sonic 2, and sometimes I'd get on a good run. And I remember distinctly once making it to the 4th zone in Sonic 2, Green Hill Zone, and my brother walks up and literally turns off my Game Gear to let me know that dinner's ready. And I remember it because I remember how angry I was.
Justifiably so.
And I have always been a head shorter than my brother until adulthood, when the Cain and Abel instinct kind of abated a little bit. But the fact of the matter was, I wasn't going to attack him over it, but it's just kind of like, you play games too? How dare you? I have to, you get to, kind of feeling. So, not often talked about, but could be another factor of what hurt the Game Gear in the long run. But also nowadays, look, while we were getting ready for this call tonight, I was ready a little before you, and to let you know that I was ready to go. And I'm just hanging out in the booth here. I have my Analog Pocket, and I'm playing Wonder Boy the Dragon Strap right now, which, yet again, good, long, dig-in kind of title. You got to use passwords to save from spot to spot. But you know what? Nowadays, if you are able to have a means of playing it like an Analog Pocket, or you mod your Game Gear, for a long time, yet again, that known but not really supported feeling, there were mods that you could do, not just capacitor refits that you would do yourself. There was the McWill mod that was kind of a screen replacement and also gave you a VGA out, which lets you know how old that was. But nowadays, I believe Benven is one of the big ones for having an HDMI out. So you can just set this up at home and play through a lot of these Game Gear titles, or have the screen up and working and take it wherever you need to. So there's a lot of fun and funky titles. I think Shinobi 2 was one that my cousin had that was a big get for me when I was able to play it myself. But, Sonic Triple Trouble is another one that it is, I believe, on the 3DS Virtual Console library, which doesn't do you a lot of favors in the modern day. But it's not one that has a lot of re-releases or a lot of access. But I would argue it is a hell of a game. There was a 16-bit mod that was released in the last year or so, I believe. So if you wanted to try it out, someone modded it so that it was basically a Sega Genesis title. So you could see it in all its glory like that, and I do recommend you do so. But I'm just going down the list here. Like, these are just games I loved.
Dude, I'm looking at some of these here, and there's ones that interest me just because of nostalgia, connotation. Berenstain Bears Camping Adventures. I have no idea if that game's good or not, but I like the Berenstain Bears. Some of these I just like the title of Zool, Ninja of the Nth Dimension.
Oh, that's on a lot of consoles. That sucker has a history.
I'm unaware of it, so that's why that's good to know.
It's a fun one.
The last one I want to shout out, and it's not for any particular reason other than I just need to see. After we're done recording, I'm going to look up a gameplay video of it. Shaq Fu on the Game Gear.
That's right, it did. That was one of those Super NES, Genesis, Game Boy, Game Gear. Was Shaq Fu on Game Gear? Game Boy? I don't know.
I would not be surprised. It is funny though. And speaking of other games that got ported to it, though, freaking Streets of Rage had a port to Game Gear, which apparently was not awful.
No, Streets of Rage 2 for the Game Gear is actually considered one of, on most top lists, it's up there as far as adaptations, as far as games. It really, they did an amazing job of bringing the Genesis experience to the Game Gear there. It was a good adaptation. And so it's one that, is it the finest, beat 'em up ever, is the finest Game Gear title? Who's to say? But it is damned impressive. Same goes for Gunstar Heroes.
Yeah, I did hear the thing for Gunstar Heroes was there was a lot of stuff they had to cut in terms of its technical ability, but still not bad. Side note, one last comment on the games once again. I double checked, Jen. Shaq Fu is on the Game Boy.
Amazing.
And
good.
Let me
Everyone
tell you,
deserves Shaq Fu.
I have a long play up right now. It's better than it has, visually. I'm going to clarify. Visually,
yes, of course.
It's better than it has any right to be.
Whereas I am looking at the thumbnail for a 10 minutes of gameplay for Shaq Fu on the Game Gear, and I'm scared.
I'm so excited for this. I'm going to be watching. I just sent you the link for the long play. Side note, the long play of the Game Boy version is 9 minutes and 36 seconds. So slow.
So I want to share with you a dream of mine. One way I want to put Game Gear on the map is I'm a big fan of speedruns. I'm currently doing some volunteer stuff for the next Summer Games Done Quick. I am a huge fan of speedruns in the community. There's not enough Game Gear speedruns, so I kind of want to put those out there, either encourage and highlight people that are doing it. I was talking to an organizer of an event a while back, and I brought up the idea of I want to do a Game Gear battery relay of let's lean into the meme here. Let's get a Game Gear with just regular batteries, turn it on, and then try to beat as many, 2 runners, however many want to do this, try to beat as many Game Gear titles as you can before the batteries run out.
That's a genius idea, dude. Holy shit.
Like, let's run with the 3 hours or whatever. And if you want to do this as part of a donation incentive or anything else, people can do things with, we can turn the Game Gear off for this amount of time, or somebody should play it or turn up the volume. Like, what can you do to drain the battery or save it while also just trying to beat the clock you don't know when it will go out?
That's fucking genius. Are you kidding me? Dude,
so,
I'm sold.
Look for that.
I'm sold.
I'll try to organize it.
That's great. I'm not a speedrunner, so I can help promote, but that's about it.
Well, we'll see what happens. And if somebody sets that up and it wasn't who I talked to before, I know you listen to the podcast.
All right, Jen, I think we're about ready to move on. But before we move on to our last segment here, before, our shout outs and, plugs and all that other stuff, is we do have a couple write-ins from the community, from listeners. Yeah. So before we get into the write-in segment for the Game Gear memories and opinions and whatnot, do you have anything else you want to bring up that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah. I'm looking at the show notes here, and I realized that because of a page break, we missed one accessory that I do want to just take a moment with, and that is the gear-to-gear cable, which was the link cable for the Game Gear. And I had one, and I used it because the first 2 titles that I got for my Game Gear were Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which is the pack-in, and Mortal Kombat 2, which my cousin also had. And by gum, I really wanted to use that and be able to have the fighting game experience and do all of that. I convinced my cousin to do this once, and I had the cable forever. And trying to get it again, looking up gear-to-gear cable, search engine optimization was not a thing back in the early 90s, the same way that it is now. And it was it actually was a very robust cable. It had a decent length for what I remember. And the funny thing about it was where it plugged in wasn't an immediately obvious port on top of the Game Gear. I mean, Josh, if you look at the top of your Game Gear, you might see like a little flat plastic piece.
Yes.
That pulls out.
Yes, it says extension right underneath it.
Yes, the one that says extension there. That is where the gear-to-gear cable goes.
Honestly, it looks like an HDMI port.
Yeah, it's about that big, and it is about a slightly thicker cable to my recollection, but I was a child at the time, so who's to say? And I know there was a good handful of games that allowed for this, but you had to know somebody else with a Game Gear and the same game as you. This is like trying to convince somebody to play a collectible card game with you that isn't Magic or Pokemon. You've got to get a friend who has bought in and you are local.
Yep.
But you know what? Maybe one day, we now live in such a fun age, maybe it can come back again.
Hey man, I remember Jeremy Parrish, this wasn't with the Game Gear, but he did rig up was it him or somebody else rigged up at like a convention or whatever, like the 16-player adapter for like a GBA game or some shit like that. I forget exactly what it was. It was.
I mean, most conventions I go to. The Lynx is the one that does 16.
It might have been that then. I don't remember which system or which game it was, but they were able to make it work. So I say we bring it back with a Game Gear thing. We'll find some Game Gear games and see what the maximum amount of players you can have. I'm assuming only 2.
I think it's only 2, but you know what? That could be part of this speed race.
You have to link up with one person. That could be a challenge.
I mean, all kinds of ways to be weird with it. Yeah.
Getting weird with Game Gear as we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
it
man.
Doesn't stop.
But all right, well, let's move on then to our listener write-in segment, or the community write-in segment. I don't do this all the time. I do it for certain episodes where I'm not sure if we're going to have enough to talk about, which I'm not going to lie, we got plenty on this one. We're running at a good clip on here, but I still solicited some write-ins, so I want to make sure they get read. Jen, why don't you start off with one of the posts from Blue Sky that someone wrote in from Blue Sky?
Yeah, absolutely. We got a response from Quell Surprise that we did want to read this, Quell. Don't worry about it. They let us know that they wanted that little TV for it so much, but they didn't realize it wouldn't let you watch cable. They were like 6, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
The terrible game about the Lillehammer Olympics was their jam, as was the Caesar's Palace game. Quote, "That's how my parents taught me to gamble." End quote.
What a great, what great teaching from your parents.
You know what? You learn all kinds of important things, and I argue that you learn the best lessons from video games sometimes if you're just open to them.
That is very true. That is very
Worst
true.
ones too, but like also some of the best.
I have over here from a friend of the show, Chris Copeland from the Retro Hangover podcast. He writes in, I love the Game Gear. I think it was because the Game Gear was my portable system as a kid. The Game Boy was my dad's. It was color and backlit, sidelit, as we already talked about. So, of course, that meant it was better, even if that meant having to go everywhere with it plugged into a cucumber-like battery pack. I remember playing hours of Sonic the Hedgehog on it, as well as Sonic 2 and Sonic Chaos. I distinctly remember my dad bringing back Sonic 2 from the UK on one of his trips, which was really cool to me, even now in retrospect, knowing how the 8 and 16-bit wars went there. Also, being able to watch TV with it was a nice little bonus. The Game Gear was a very foundational part of my gaming life, and in fact, is the only console from my childhood that I still have in my possession.
That's really nice.
That's so cool, man. I mentioned at the top of the episode, Jen, how like there's so few people that have memories of it. It seems like you and Chris are, kindred spirits in that regard.
Yeah, and it's funny to think of, the games that we remember, the games that we have, and certainly as children, I feel like handheld games were a real way of having games that were yours, where there is fighting over the controller or two-player games or anything else, but there is something wonderful about a handheld device. And there are a lot of good emulator consoles out there now, little handheld things that can do those, but I will get nostalgic and old about it and say that some of these where you had to change the cartridge and everything else, I enjoyed the process and still do. And it's real cool when other folks have that feeling too, where it's just like, this was mine and this was what I got to do with it.
I also think I know this is not entirely your point, but you talk about like the fact of, switching out cartridges is, something that's very quintessential to this era. Obviously that's how all the games were, but whenever I wax poetic about my love and nostalgia for video games, one thing that I think I'm still trying to find ways to describe it in words, but the feeling of like when you put in a cartridge to your system and you play the game, that the cartridge felt like a key to a new world. And I think having a handheld version, like a handheld key to a little mini handheld universe, is just such a magical feeling to a kid, right?
It really is.
Even now, as a 37, nearly 38-year-old man, I'll be turning 38, but this episode will come out between this recording and the episode releasing. My birthday will happen, and it is I will be 38. But as a 37, nearly 38-year-old man, I still sometimes just look at the NES, at the Game Boy, at the Sega Genesis, and I just like get not fully choked up, but I do get a little emotional just thinking about how many journeys and adventures these systems took people on, people that I'll never meet. And I don't know, thinking about like childhood memories of like plugging a cartridge into a Game Boy, or in the instance for this episode, a Game Gear, and going on these crazy adventures, I just find really just beautiful.
I agree. And there is something fun about finding those games now. I had a lot of these games as a kid, and when I was in college, I sold off most of my video game collection, and everything I have now is stuff I've rebuilt from. So there are some games that I got for Game Gear that are not good games, but you know what? I had Batman Forever as a kid. I have Batman Forever again. So sometimes it's just worth getting those, but any of those finds, any of those pieces, the possibilities of them are absolutely fantastic, should not be discounted. And even the fact that really the big regret I have as far as getting rid of my old collection was I had all of the instruction manuals. I held on to those. I kept those in my little shoulder bag with all of my Game Gear games. Those were just as much of an entrance into the world. I learned the lore of Mortal Kombat through reading Mortal Kombat 2 for the Game Gear. I learned how to pronounce the word realm from that.
That's so funny, man.
These are those things. These are those artifacts and pieces.
They're so important. I'm hoping so. Like my daughter is 5, right? And
Mhm.
I'm hoping to like I know I'm not gonna try to make like recreate my childhood for her, like let her experience her own thing, but I
Mhm.
am trying to at least add like sprinkle bits of my childhood in to see what she enjoys and what she doesn't. Now it's funny. I don't. This is not part of my childhood, but it still is '90s like media. Know it's
Mhm.
something she's been really into that is actually Sega related.
What's that?
The Pico.
Nice.
I have a boxed Sega Pico with a handful of games, and she really likes the 101 Dalmatians game the storyware that came with it, as they call it.
That's fantastic.
It's really
I
cool.
Yeah, I recently plugged in an old Super NES for a friend and their kids, and by gum, they'd never played Super Mario World before. They haven't played a ton of video games, but they were going for it and they were enjoying it.
That's awesome. That makes me
Something,
happy to hear. All
yeah,
right, let's move on. We have 2 more to read, Jen. I'm going
yeah,
to throw it back over to you. There's 2 more from Blue Sky, so go ahead and pick
y-
one.
yeah. Well, we've got Pixel Project Radio that wrote in, so Rick let us know that somebody else has actually played the Game Gear a little bit, and I really enjoy because you put this call out on Blue Sky right before we started, so I'm going to read this one verbatim. I'm guessing you're already recording, but still. I played the heck out of this when I went to my cousin's house as a kid. All I played was Sonic and Road Rash, but I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And then our parents bought us Game Boys and Pokemon, and, well,
Well, I understand. You cannot resist Pokemania.
you
That's a fever that was almost impossible to ignore back in the
you can't, you
90s.
shan't, you won't. No, that like I said, I saved up my money and bought myself a Game Boy Pocket so that I could play Pokemon Blue. Like that was what got me into Game Boy. Before that,
Pokemania
all
was
Game
a
Gear.
hell of a drug, man.
Hell of a drug.
Hell of a drug. Our final write-in from the community from Nolano386 on Blue Sky. They write, I wanted one as soon as I saw it. That bright, colorful screen mesmerized me. By the time I saw one in person, it probably had already flopped. I finally bought one last week and fixed it, so I'm playing it for the first time this weekend. And they provided a picture of their working Game Gear with Sonic 2 on it, and it looks absolutely beautiful. I'm just going to say it. It looks great. That's
There's
awesome
this,
though. Like it's something that
yeah,
they were so mesmerized by as a kid, and they decided to go out and buy it now anyway, just to kind of fulfill a childhood like dream. I guess that's really cool.
yeah. No, there is something fun in going back like that. I mean, a memory that I never really touched on here was the fact that I did mention that this was the scrappy system for me to fight for a little bit, and I do like to be oppositional like that. I'm a little shit, but the thing was, anytime you would get gaming magazines that had codes and tips and tricks, they didn't have them for Game Gear. Sometimes they had
No,
them for Game Boy, but Game Gear was just kind of, Nintendo Power was a beast. And I found out that Sega had its own magazine. It had Sega Visions.
yeah.
And I'm pretty sure when I got one, I got the literal final issue of it.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's the one with Fahrenheit on the cover. So I think that's the last one. It was issue 20. So it was talking about the 32X and everything else. So this was definitely, this was August, September 1994. And that was just what I think I got it as just kind of a handout at an event not long after I got my Game Gear. So there were some things in decline there. And, I wanted to know how to do the cool fatalities in Mortal Kombat 2. I wanted to turn into a dragon. I wanted skull face scorpion. No one
Yep.
told me how to do it. Sometimes I'd accidentally do it. Like, I think I accidentally did Jax's fatality a few times. And then I maybe found on GameFAQs, like, one little write-up that somehow I figured out how to do Liu Kang's and turn into a dragon. But nowadays I can look them up. Nowadays I can find them. But they're still actually a little tricky because, search engines are getting worse. But also, things get lumped together in terms of what something's for, what something is. Before we started recording, I wanted to check my knowledge. I still could pull out a couple of passwords for Aladdin on the Game Gear.
Wow.
I
That's
was
cool.
they were 4 letters. So it's still,
But still, that's the system's 35 years old, Jen. That's still amazing that you remember that.
but if I wanted to just get straight to fighting Jafar, UIAN was all I needed to do. And I remembered another one was BLTO, because for me, I'm just like Bluto. And like my brain, this is the way my brain works.
Like a Popeye reference.
or like bacon, lettuce, tomato. Oh, whatever way you remember it. This is why I remember these things. I was like, I don't remember which stage that is. Was that the one? Was that the chase level with Jafar beforehand? So I just wanted to look it up, and I found this massive page of cheats for Aladdin for Game Gear, as it said on the top. But it also had the level skip code. I was like, I didn't know you could skip levels. Oh, because this is the Genesis level skip code. Because it talks about hitting the A and the B button when Game Gear had 1 and 2. And a lot of the other stuff I started looking through is like, okay, the passwords are correct. Everything else is just for other versions of Aladdin. And I think Aladdin was one of the better selling games for the Game Gear. It certainly was well advertised, but that's just the kind of coverage that goes on. And it's fun to be able to go back and see these things and find them. And there is, we are not alone. And there are certainly more than dozens of us that are fighting for the history of the Game Gear one way or another and preserving it. But it does still sometimes feel like a little bit of a scrappy fight. That hasn't changed.
Well, I think it kind of. I did an episode last year, kind of on something kind of similar to this, about called "Deconstructing the Nintendo Bump," and with Chris from Retro Hangover, as we read his comment before, and Stika from the YouTube channel Stika, and it just kind of like the reason I wanted to do it is because Stika likes to poke fun at Nintendo fans because Stika is from Portugal, if I'm remembering correctly.
Were Sega fucking killed?
Yes, it destroyed there. And what his point was that the I actually can't agree or disagree with this, but he said the Sega Saturn was a better system than the N64. The N64, almost everywhere but North America, didn't do nearly as well. The N64 did gangbusters in North America, but it didn't do as well in Japan and blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of like the crux of his point and this and that. And I haven't played enough Saturn games just in general to either push back or push forward in agreement or anything like that. But it led me to the discussion point of like deconstructing the Nintendo bump of like, what is it about Nintendo that gives them this favorable view in the gaming zeitgeist? And then we discuss about like how it's been represented in YouTube. Nintendo history, is represented in YouTube and all this other stuff. But I say all that to bring up the fact with the Game Gear where it's like it very much has fallen into that has been hit by the Nintendo bump in the sense that it's on the negative side of it, the negative end. There are some Sega consoles that still receive lots of praise. Obviously, the Genesis does, the Dreamcast, but the others don't really get talked about all that much. Saturn is either starkly defended or a punching bag. The CD and Sega CD and the 32X, while yes, they're technically part of the Genesis, they're also kind of their own consoles.
Yes, they are.
Like they're kind of like. It's a mixed bag of either punching bag or like, it's not as bad as you think. The Game Gear just never gets talked about, both negative or positive. At best, it's the battery thing. That's usually what it is, and usually then at that, it's just a quick little quip, like a little jab, and it's not like a full on like, man, the Game Gear sucks, blah blah blah. If it is that, it stops and ends at the battery thing, without actually analyzing the system.
Well, and I would argue on that. It's a lot like, well, for you, where you, Josh, don't have a huge history with the Game Gear. And there are so many games out there, and we do want to feel informed on these things. And so we kind of pick up the bits and pieces of, well, the battery thing is, for better or for worse, pretty much true. It's like, okay, that is a true thing. Great. And I can, make a quick joke about that. It's what do you know about the Game Gear? I'll tell you what I know about the Game Gear. The battery life sucked. So you didn't play it at all. Nope.
No, and then that's exactly it, Jen. It's like a journalist writing a story, but they only have one fact
Mm-hmm.
out of a story that has a lot more that's needed to be told for its context.
And everybody is extrapolating from that one fact, and it's circular, comes back to that, but people need to fill space.
Yes. Instead of just taking time to look at listen, I'm not an expert,
Right.
so I can't
I'm not
say
either.
I can't say for certain, but to me, the Game Gear, it's weird to say that something is correct and also reductive. Did the Game Gear fail because of its battery life? Yes. Is it the sole reason? No. There's a whole bunch of other factors, but I would say one of the largest is its price tag and the battery life. Because most times when you're going to make informed decisions when you're buying something, you would see, oh, this is what did we say? It was 150, right? So what is this? It was $60 more, and it lasted 40 hours on the Game Boy compared to 5 on the Game Gear, and on top of that, it took 2 more batteries. It's not even close. So the Game Gear sits at a weird place in discourse where the popular trolling statement about the batteries is correct, but it also at the same time completely undermines all the good stuff that the Game Gear did and what it had, and it's weird because they're not wrong, but at the same time they're just being dicks because they're not looking far enough into it.
Right. Well, it's hard to have access to these things. It genuinely is, and that's for good or for ill. But it kind of comes back to something I said a little while ago where, you know what, you could argue me down to the Game Gear was not a successful system, but I will fight tooth and nail that it was not a failure in that same kind of way. Is the thing about the batteries true? Yes. But is to only focus on that deeply reductive? Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's a better way to phrase what I was trying to get at earlier, where the battery thing is probably one of the largest factors as to why it was not as successful as the Game Boy. But at the same time, you're right, Jen. It's extremely reductive to analyzing the system.
You have the Sega pushed the same kind of advertising campaign between the Genesis and the Game Gear, where it absolutely was like, look at Nintendo. They're so slow. Look at how fast Sonic is. Get wrecked, kids. Look at how silly those stupid Game Boy players are. They don't even have color. Check out the Game Gear. It's got amazing things. But it doesn't go as well on the Game Gear because the Genesis had a little bit of a foothold already. It had arcade perfect conversions happening, so it had impressive tech going on in a home console situation, and the idea of arcade perfect home gameplay was that sort of philosopher's stone going on at the time, whereas trying to push that same kind of narrative for the Game Gear was a little murky, and it was a swing. It certainly wasn't as bad as the Gamecom doing that same kind of idea years later. Game Gear had better footing there, but that could also be a factor. There's 1,000 reasons, but this is the one we know. And in much the same way that there's over 360 domestic Game Gear games. Listener, how many have you played?
Mm-hmm. Dude, I probably played less than 10 of that, and I didn't, and I just did this whole episode on it. You know what I mean? There's so much out there.
I love this system. I've played maybe 50. I want to play more of them. And I'm gonna, damn it.
May I shout out, even though I haven't played it, I own it, and I'm just shouting out because the name makes me laugh. Poker Face Paul's Blackjack.
Amazing.
What a great name for a game. Are you kidding me? Apparently, according to Wikipedia, Poker Face Paul is a series of 4 video games for Game Gear. Holy shit. It's all
once you
Game Gear.
mentioned it, I'm like, oh, is it the one that's got the old-timey visor dealer guy?
Yes,
it is. They've got blackjack, they got poker, they've got solitaire,
they have
and
gin.
I think roulette or gin. Okay.
Yeah, Poker Face Paul's gin.
You know what? I might need to pick these up. I
Poker
think my
Face
local
Paul,
game store
Poker
has
Face Paul sounds
one
like
of
a
them.
real gem.
Yeah. No, and this was, again, when I was getting Sega games, there was also the little fold-out advertisements that were had a poster on the back of a game, and then on the other side was little, screen caps of games for the Genesis, the Game Gear, and the Sega CD, because that was the push at the time, and accessories along the bottom. That's where I saw pictures of the TV tuner. That's where I saw Sega CD games that in my adult collecting days, I'm like, I know this game sucks. I saw too many pictures of it, though. I need to spend $15 on this bad game. And Game Gear has pushed us as much, and there's still game. You know what? I still have some of those. I should try to get some of those games. And yet again, Poker Face Paul shows up on stuff, and these are. And I imagine I'm not alone in seeing stuff. I mean, I know I'm not, because we're talking about it, Josh. That you see something, you're like, oh yeah, that did exist. Let's go a little further.
And speaking of going a little further, sorry, while you were talking, I was just curious more about Poker Face Paul. It was developed by a company called Spidersoft Limited. They would go on to work on Red Dead Redemption 2. They're part of Rockstar now.
This is why you don't close game studios.
They made Poker Face Paul and Hook for the Game Gear. That's interesting. They also developed pinball construction set for the home computer in 1996.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That which was a really popular thing and like software in the 90s. That's really funny. That's fucking nuts. Yeah, they worked on they did the Grand Theft Auto port for the Game Boy Color.
Right. I'm also trying to remember. I think Pinball Construction Set had a Genesis port of some kind, but hold on.
I wouldn't be surprised. They were Tarantula Studios when they did. No, sorry, they were Pinball. They were still Spidersoft when they did Pinball. Then they changed the name to Tarantula Studios, and in 2001 they got bought out by Rockstar. But yeah, that's just really funny to me that the same team that made Poker Face Paul would go on to work on Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yeah. The way this all links together, and to close the loop on that one, Virtual Pinball for the Sega Genesis is what I'm thinking of. It's a game that I picked up a little while ago.
Okay.
It is a follow-up to Pinball Construction Set.
That's crazy. That's so cool. All right, I think we got to wrap this one up though, Jen. We're going at nearly 2 hours.
Our double A's are dying. Damn it!
Our double A's. Hey man, we could technically still. Hey, just to shout out to the Game Gear. We could have gone on an extra 3 hours still and still be fine. You know
what? It ain't over till the power light starts flashing.
Exactly. But at least for this one, I think the power light is starting to flash for this. But man, Jen, thank you so much for joining me on this. This was so much fun. I was. Like I said at the top, with me not having a lot of experience, I wasn't sure how much content or how much I'd have to say about the Game Gear. And I'm very happy we had a lot to say. This system deserves more love. And I guess to wrap this up with some final thoughts on the system, and then we'll go, is all I'll say is that the system deserves more love. We already kind of given a lot of final thoughts here and there and waxed poetically about it over the last little bit, but man, it's a great system, and as much as the battery thing is an issue, be honest with yourself. A lot of you play your Switch at home on even if it's not docked, on handheld mode, just in your bed. So why don't just swap that out for a Game Gear, plug it into the wall, and just play a little bit. It's not that inconvenient. Now, I'm not saying if you're trying to make this an actual handheld, play it on the go. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. But if you're trying to, if you want to find a Game Gear and kind of tinker around with it, it's very much worth it. It's very much worth checking out. And I just remembered something that you brought up, Jen, that I was gonna. You mentioned, I should say, and it reminded me of something with their advertising campaign for this.
Yeah.
They actually got in trouble for their advertising campaign for this. Did you read about that at all?
Oh, that's right. They did. They were a little offensive or something.
Very offensive. There was basically you must be blind if you like the Game Boy over us. A lot of ableist type of shit.
Yes, there was. There was definitely a commercial with somebody hitting himself in the face with a dead squirrel so that he could see the colors.
It wasn't just anyone, Jen. That's Ethan.
It was Ethan Suplee.
Yeah. from now he's like this ripped like bodybuilder dude. But I first saw him. I know he was in what is it? My Name Is Earl. I think he was in that show, right? I don't remember.
I believe so. Yes, he was in a bunch of stuff.
I know him from Mallrats.
Yes, same. Willem.
Well, yeah. I love him in Mallrats. He's great. Yes, he was in My Name Is Earl. That's right. I just wanted to double check. But yeah, that's just funny to me. So shout out to Ethan Suplee, man. Hitting himself in the head with a squirrel because he was told to.
You know what? I've done many strange things as an actor. Here.
I believe it. My brother is also an actor.
There is evidence of me out there in tinfoil armor for a dating app commercial.
What? Oh, that's awesome.
You know what? I'm not going to tell anybody where it is. Not on recorded medium. I'm not embarrassed by it. I just want this to be a fun game.
I like it. See if y'all can find it. But yeah, so that's kind of my final thoughts though on the system though. It's a great system. It has its problems. I'm not going to deny that, but I think there's enough interesting games here that it is worth looking at just to experience them. There's a lot of cool stuff on this system, and it's worth checking out. So, Jen, I'll throw it over to you as the guest for the final word on the Sega Game Gear.
Yeah, you know what? You set it up really nicely, Josh. The landscape of handheld gaming, so-called portable gaming, has changed in the last 35 years. And I said before that Sega has taken a lot of big swings over the years, and they've had a lot of good and useful and fun ideas that were just poorly timed or just not exactly as implemented as perfectly as they should have or could have. But if you're going back and trying out some Game Gear now, it's either on a more convenient system, or you can plug it into the wall, like Josh said, and it's basically just like a Switch, or you're modding it a little bit yourself. You're investing the time a little bit, and giving that little bit of investment is going to be so rewarding. There is a fun experience for you in the Game Gear library. You just got to find it, and it may be an easier search than you think. For me, I know I haven't played every fun game in the library, and I'm looking forward to all kinds of great discoveries, and I'm already an obsessive for this console, so why don't you join me?
I don't think there's a better way to wrap this up. Join both of us in exploring more of the game.
Join us.
Join one of us. All right.
We're going to get weird with it. We're going to get real weird.
We get real weird with the game.
I don't know how much time these batteries have got. I'm going to get real weird with it.
Oh, man. Well, all right, Jen. Thank you once again for joining me on this one. This was so much fun. I appreciate you giving me your time for this and chatting about the Game Gear for nearly 2 hours, probably over 2 hours after editing. I don't know what the time's going to be.
We'll see what happens.
I appreciate you. Where can the good people find you online if you're to be found online, and what would you like to promote?
Well, I am, as you mentioned at the top of the show, one half of Fun and Games podcast, where my co-producer, Matt Storm, and I have discussions and interviews within the gaming scene and about games as a medium, as a culture, with an optimistic view of gaming. We come at it with the idea that no one can play every game, but every game is somebody's favorite. And maybe some of them are in the Game Gear library too. And we also do a series called Side Quests that is a different host every episode talking about a video game they love and why they love it for 5 to 20 minutes. And if you've got a game you love and no one else has claimed it yet, you get in touch with us and let us know, and we'll be happy to have you on the show. You can find Fun and Games anywhere you find podcasts, and Fun and Games Pod on any social media that we are currently active upon. You can find me on Blue Sky, on Instagram. I do plan on Twitch streaming again, especially if Game Gear is a thing for me, at Noise Generator with a silent G at the front of it. And any sort of acting things I do or whatever else you can find at genmoonen.com.
All right. I will make sure to include links in the show notes for all of that. So please make sure you go there to check it out. As for myself, you can follow me on Blue Sky at StillLoadingPodcast.com, on Instagram at StillLoadingPod, on Twitch at StillLoadingPod, where I stream whenever the hell I'm able to. I actually recently beat Horizon Forbidden West over there, where I streamed like that almost every day, just about for like 2 weeks. And now it's been like a week and a half since I last streamed because I burned myself out. So it's kind of all over the place. So if you want to know when I go live, you could just follow me over there. If you want to support the show, the easiest way to do that is give it a 5-star rating or review on whichever podcasting app you use. It helps more people find the show and it pleases the algorithm gods or something like that. I hope it does at least.
Feed the algorithm.
Feed the algorithm. Feed it with your reviews, please. You can do that on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use. If you really like the show and you want to support it, though, I do have a Patreon, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For only $1 a month, you get all the episodes a little bit earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to patron voting rights, which help guide the direction of the show. There will be another poll coming up in late June, I want to say. So I do them at least quarterly, and sometimes I do more than that. So keep an eye out over there. For $3 a month, you get all the stuff I mentioned at the $1 tier, plus patron shout outs, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. In fact, Jen's co-host over at Fun and Games, Matt Storm, is a patron, and you heard their name at the top of the episode here. For $4 a month, you get everything I mentioned prior in the 2 previous tiers, plus 2 mini bonus episodes every month. And for $5 a month, you get everything. You get all the previous tiers, the bonus episodes, the early access, the voting, the shout outs, and you get access to my monthly movie podcast, which changes name depending on the theme. And right now it is called Still Muppeting. It's the only Muppet movie podcast where me and Doug from the Nostalgia Marcana podcast play the music, we light the lights, and we talk about the Muppets on Still Muppeting tonight. And that is all over at the $5 level. But that is it. That is all the time I have for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Jen, thank you once again for joining me.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you, listeners.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.